Welcome along to this latest edition of the CHIC Podcast. So, gentlemen, good to be here with you. Good to have a chat, a bit of a reflection and a bit of a look forward. Can I just start with a very simple question to you first, John, and then to you, Luke. Why is CHIC special to you both?
Special to me because I created it 16 years ago with a bit of a vision to get organisations within the affordable housing sector to collaborate so that they could provide better outcomes for residents and save money, make asset management and procurement more efficient. And I'm very proud, 16 years on, to the fact it's achieved that, but it's achieved it at scale. So that's why it's special to me.
Luke?
I'd kind of mirror that. I think the fact that it's an asset management focused consortium that brings collaboration across a sector that so desperately needs more people to collaborate is fundamental to what CHIC actually does and sort of where it's gone on its journey. But for me, part of the big success for CHIC has actually been the team within CHIC as well, and seeing them grow and develop, and their skills and their knowledge, and actually understanding actually how they impact into the sector is such a great story for me in terms of where CHIC is and where it's going to go in the future.
And you're obviously a member-led organisation. What really does being member-led mean for how you operate the organisation and the design of the frameworks that you provide?
So the Procurement Act 2023, supported quite rightly by the current government, is very focused on public sector procurement being by the public sector for the public sector. So CHIC being member owned, led and governed is really important to meet those expectations. Relatively recent application and verification for constructing the gold standard, overseen by Constructing Excellence, is part of that accreditation effectively for being a member-led organisation. So from inception, that's always been a really important part of what we are.
Again, it's core to what we do as a business. As John says, not only legislative-wise is now public procurement supposed to be designed by the public sector for the public sector, but actually it's about getting into the sort of nuts and bolts as to what we do and making it fit for purpose. There are still a lot of sort of frameworks and other routes to market that are available out in the public sector that don't actually suit the public sector or don't work as effectively as they should do, which does bring some kind of an element of people not fully understanding what frameworks are there to deliver. But being member-led allows us to design our framework so they fundamentally support what we do within the housing sector.
Okay, great. And Luke, you built a large and it continues to grow team here. How would you define the culture that's been built here at CHIC?
Well, we do a lot of interviews, and one of the key things that always comes up in the interviews is that it's a family. It feels very much like the team work very closely together to deliver what can be a very complicated journey to bring not just the frameworks to market, but also any further competitions, and ensure that actually contractors get on site and are delivering the work to the residents. Now, that family culture, that ability to work so collaboratively together, is fundamentally what we want within the business, and we look to employ people that sort of buy into that culture and live and breathe it. So very much so a family culture.
That's good. And John, you've obviously been on this journey for 16 years. What do you think John Fisher on day one of being CEO of CHIC would think of it today?
Interesting question. I think the aspirations for what we've achieved were there at day one. The new business strategy, which Luke will take forward from the 1st of July, has exactly the same objectives and expectations that the original business plan all those years ago had. The only thing that's different is scale, so that John Fisher would be just dead chuffed with the growth of CHIC going from regional to national and the scale of what we're delivering. But what we're delivering is what we always set out to and have stayed true to.
So you're staying very core to that vision you had of what you set the organisation up to be. So you've gone from humble beginnings to where you are today as one of the country's largest procurement and asset management consortiums. For those 16 years, John, what have been some of those key landmarks that you've seen on that journey on the way?
Like most roads, there's been bumps in this one. The early years, the first big learning was that a consortium of organisations who'd sponsored it being set up to put their work through it. Only one of the 7 actually did that. So we then had to turn the model into one that made an offer effectively to the sector and encouraged more users. Progressive growth took place from there. But we had an external IT provider who got into trouble, not related to us, but we then had to take a different route. We then became part of a consortium of consortia. The lesson from that was far better being independent. So we had some quite big challenges, operational challenges, in the first 7 or 8 years. Having made the decision to focus on independence and to widen the geographical area, and for me, some absolutely key appointments. Luke was one of them, but some other senior staff who are still with us. We built a really, really good leadership team that's enabled us to take growth to where we are now. So the first sort of half of CHIC's life was dead hard, but enjoyable. The second half has been probably even more demanding from a workload point of view, but probably more enjoyable because of what we've achieved.
Great. And Luke, you seem to be taking on the Chief Executive role. You've obviously been here for a while. During your time, how have you seen the organisation evolve over the last few years? And can you explain how those kind of experiences are shaping your vision for what you want CHIC to become over the next 5 years or so under your leadership?
Yeah, I think certainly over the last few years, one of the key focuses for CHIC has actually been on the partnership side of it. So recognising that when a contract is let through a CHIC framework, that there are 2 key parties involved. There's obviously the member who has the requirements of what they need to do, but there's also the supplier that is delivering it. And CHIC and all consortia really need to understand their role in facilitating that partnership and making sure that those partnerships are successful. So one of the core changes that we made was actually being able to focus more on that partnership side of it as well and keep those relationships working strong. And I think that has been some of the foundations for where CHIC has grown and how we've built our reputation to where we are now. And I'd like to see that obviously continue. But for me, it's about knowledge. So the sector goes on around data and how data is used both internally within members and clients to inform their decisions. Well, actually, as a consortia, certainly of our size now, we manage an awful lot of data. So we should be able to use that data effectively to advise and guide the sector on best practice, how to approach some of these big procurements, how to approach long-term strategic asset management decisions. And that for me is a key area that we need to focus on for the next 5 years.
So you both talked about the team and the quality of people that you've put together. What really is the components to building a successful team? How do you know when you've hired this right CHIC person, or other kind of common characteristics you see?
Getting the structure right, which has been evolutionary because the team has grown very quickly. Again, what we do hasn't changed, just the volume of which has changed. And the structure actually becomes optimised when I leave. So we've been working to an end goal, which we're almost at. But the 4 constituent parts are very professional procurement services with a very professional procurement team, member services, so very front-focused, effectively account managing our members, strategic services, which is what Luke's been talking about in terms of our technical and commercial capability, which is absolutely key. We are asset managers who do procurement. And then the 4th part, which is essentially what I'm handing over, is all the communications and particularly work with social value in terms of outcomes, but also what we call partnerships, which is the relationship with our supply chain members. And we see those, and it's been a really important part of the equation that Luke has really driven. We see strong partnership relationships with the supply chain as important as are those with our members. So we're actually working with all the stakeholders effectively in partnership, albeit with procurement purity in the middle.
And how have you kind of changed the organisational dynamic as the social housing sector itself has changed?
I think for me, fundamental to when we're recruiting new people into the business, it's about looking at that social conscience that people have. We're very good at getting people that want to work hard and actively do work hard. We are a business that operates to make sure that we're delivering success for the sector. But at the end of it, it's always about the resident. So it's always about looking forward and making sure that actually the guidance that we give, whether it's through the technical commercial team, so in terms of the contracts that are set up, whether it's through the specifications that we go out to market with, always have an underpinning of making sure that they're delivering value to a resident out on the ground. And that's not always very easy, because sometimes we come across challenges between a member organisation's strategic goals in terms of their governance and corporate goals, and actually what is best practice in terms of on the ground. But our people are there to offer that guidance and that advice, and that's what we look for when we sort of bring people in, and is underpins again the culture that we have in the business.
Yeah, and it's obviously an ongoing journey, and there's a lot of talk about at the moment about the younger generation going into work and training and everything like that. When it comes to CHIC and recruiting the next generation of talent to come in, what's your approach to kind of making sure that procurement, asset management, the social housing sector is actually an attractive career option for the next generation?
It's a big challenge out in the sector. One of the key themes that I've certainly been talking about for the last 5 years is that the sector isn't actually particularly very good at promoting itself to the younger generation. A key example of that was my lad when he was at school doing his A-levels. There was a careers day, and housing and asset management wasn't actually represented. Contractors were, but housing and asset management wasn't. So I got in touch with the head teacher, who I happen to know, and we did go along, and we did have some representation there. But it's about getting that message out. Some of it is about spending time with the younger generation, sort of building up their knowledge and understanding of the sector. But it's also about working with apprentices that do come through, graduate apprentices. We've been very successful at CHIC about bringing some apprentices through. Harris is a classic example of that. Did his 2-year graduate apprentice with us, and he's now in our commercial team, and he's building up a fantastic career. We have another apprentice on board today. They're the ones that need to go out. They're the ones that need to be talking to the younger generation and talking about their experiences that they've had coming into the sector and where they're going for the future.
Yeah, it's peer group to peer group, isn't it? That does.
Can I add, Andy? I think there's two, for me, really important points. One, that we've made sure we've employed a full range, a very diverse range of people in the business, and including a lot of relative youngsters. And we have seen and are seeing them grow their careers. We've got some people who may have been with us 4, 5, 6 years, and they might be in a second or third job. So we've been able to develop them, and that's hugely refreshing and rewarding for us. The second thing is there are at least 2 people in the CHIC team who have applied for different jobs and have not been the best candidate for those jobs. But we've also been recruiting for something else and gone back and said, actually, they'd be really good at that. So we've used the recruitment process to actually identify talent and bring it in. And those 2 individuals are doing really well in the jobs we pull them in to do.
Great. Just circling back a little bit to you talked about the importance of social value, John. Can you just touch upon why that is so important to the frameworks you create here at CHIC?
So the sector we work in, Andy, is for people whose life chances are generally more limited. They need subsidised housing, and generally are in communities which just have less than a lot of other people. So their rent is what pays for the work that gets onto their homes, and it's what pays for the services that the CHIC provide. So it was always fundamentally important that what we did gave something back in terms of social value outcomes. If I'm honest, the earlier years we were too busy doing the asset management and procurement, and our social value offer was relatively immature. We've made huge strides over the last 4 or 5 years to where it is now. And all of our contracts should be, and most of them are, delivering a minimum of 1% social value, which goes back into the communities who are paying for it. But as CHIC, we make sure that 10% of what we do every year is dedicated to social value outcomes. And yesterday, I was reviewing the papers for the next CHIP trustees meeting, which is our associated charity, and just the number of organisations, local employment groups and community groups that CHIP is supporting with funding primarily provided through CHIC is just really, really rewarding from my point of view. And most of them, not all, but most of them are about getting young people or ex-offenders or ex-military personnel into the construction industry. We absolutely need more people in construction, and us doing our part is hugely important to make sure that that's achieved. So I'm dead proud of that.
Yeah, and it builds that pipeline we were just talking about of people coming in. Luke, I'm sure social value is going to continue to be central in CHIC's proposition under your leadership. I suppose the question, how do you ensure that it's meaningful and measurable?
I think, as John sort of explained there, I think early days our social value offering was a bit immature. It has matured massively over time. The introduction of CHIP as our sort of associated charity and the work that they do through measuring social value output and actually working with the supply chain to ensure that that 1% that they commit when they tender into a framework is delivered and measurable under the HACT model. It is core to what we do, and we need to continue along that journey of reporting, measuring and reporting on social value. But what is actually quite interesting, although we have 1% commitment from the supply chain through any sort of contract that's let through CHIC and 10% from CHIC, when we actually look at the numbers for this last year, over 15% on our capital spend, so that's a total amount of money that our members are spending through a CHIC contract. 15% of that was returned as social value under the HACT model, under the social return. That's massive. We're talking very big numbers, very big outputs, and a huge amount of social return on investment. So we need to make sure that we continue that journey and continue that sort of reporting throughout the rest of the time that we are.
Yeah, it's a very important message, isn't it? Because in many ways, you're a community partner as well as an economic partner in those kind of areas that you're dealing with. And I suppose that is a key thing for you, again, as a member organisation, to keep that at the forefront of people's minds.
Yeah, all too often, I think in procurement, social value has always been part of the procurement journey, or the sort of tendering journey, and a lot goes in from the supply chain in terms of how they're going to deliver social value. And actually, they are very good at doing social value. But one thing that historically hasn't been very good is actually measuring the outputs against what is committed at tender stage. So, tender question is submitted, it is scored, contractor gets a score. And what then tends to happen is it falls on the operational teams. So it might fall on the local contract manager to actually deliver the works, but also try and measure what the social promises were that a contractor put in. And with all the best will in the world, they're not the best place to do that. And that, for me, is where CHIC can add real value, because actually we can work with that supply chain to ensure that their commitments have been delivered, that the local economy is getting the benefit that they intended to through the contract, and actually then report that back to the member so that they can report it onto their residents, which is ultimately who need to know about what is being delivered.
Yeah. So John, 16 years on, how do you feel the social housing sector views CHIC? And what do you think they value most about what you provide and how you operate?
That's a big question. So what I like to think they see us for is, as we've already said, an asset management consortium that does procurement. Some consortia will only really do projects above a certain level, financial level, and we set CHIC out to provide everything in the asset management and the scope of asset management that our members have to do. So quite a lot of what we do around things like building safety are relatively low value contracts and quite specialist. So there's a degree of cross-subsidising. So I think a lot of organisations come to us because we have a complete offer for everything, which is asset management, including related consultancy services, legal fees, and so on. Beyond that, I think it's about service. We work incredibly hard to deliver the outcomes that members want. And we're very reactive as well as being proactive with them to see their programs coming down the road. The sector is still actually quite reactive, approach to spot buying, and we respond really well to help organisations do that. So great service business, and fundamentally that understands asset management and gets procurement right rather than just does procurement.
So Luke, we're recording this just off the back of another very successful CHIC conference, and obviously throughout the year you run quite a few in-person conferences, exhibitions, workshops. What's the power of these kind of in-person events for the sector, and what drives you to build and invest in a proposition of putting on these live events for the sector?
I think, as I kind of mentioned earlier, sort of sharing best practice and knowledge is core to the sector growing and maturing in its own right, and certainly as it sort of comes up against challenges like the Building Safety Act, net zero, etc., which were challenges to the sector to deliver. Bringing people together face to face, whether at a conference, a round table event, or even just a workshop, being able to sort of coordinate and share ideas is really, really core to getting that message across. And there's so much good stuff that's happening out there at the moment that isn't always shouted about. And again, as a sector, we're not actually very good, and probably CHIC isn't as good as we should be about shouting about our successes. So bringing people together gives them an opportunity to express that and to do that. But also it's about the challenges. So, if we've had a success, it's usually because something went wrong at some point. And again, we're not very good collectively about sharing those experiences of when it went wrong. For me, bringing people through a conference, whether it's the main CHIC conference in Telford, or whether it's some of our smaller conferences and round tables, it's about sharing that knowledge and making sure that when people walk away, they feel like they've actually got something out of it.
Okay. And I'm just interested from both of you, so the kind of conversations that go on that you have with people in the sector, what do they kind of tell you that they want procurement to provide them with? Are we moving beyond it's a tick box exercise, it's something we have to do? Are they looking for more of that strategic value?
Differs hugely across the sector. There are individuals who just see it as a box-ticking exercise, a vehicle of convenience, and will want to play one consortium off against another and just be interested in fee, measuring cost rather than value, which in our view is a mistake. Positively, we're seeing more of a trend towards organisations who are thinking longer term about their procurement and starting to talk to us about longer term programmes. If we achieve longer term programmes, there's more efficiency driven through both the procurement process but also the delivery process. If an organisation makes a longer term commitment to a contractor and a supplier, then that organisation understands what its order book is and can then invest in the people, so back to social value, back to recruitment and training. But it's a hugely varied approach. Some people use us just for one service, some use us for all services. Where we'd like to see it go is longer term strategic asset management, investment planning and procurement with more organisations. But I've been in the sector a very long time, and that's been kind of my holy grail, and we're quite a long way off it as a sector.
Can I just add to that? I think one of the key successes that CHIC has had as a consortium in the sector is around that ongoing support. Some of the procurement houses will do a piece of procurement. They'll get to a point that the contract is in place, and then they will kind of walk away and leave the organisations to manage that contract in its entirety. CHIC takes a very different approach to our managed service, so we actively want to stay engaged throughout the life of a contract. Some of that is about the expertise that we have and about having that independent view of the contractual terms, but it's also about ensuring that actually procurement should be engaged very early on in a strategic vision so that you understand the routes to market. And a key example where it's not quite worked as effectively, you take SHDF funding or net zero type funding, that procurement typically was engaged really very, very late. And when you've got a time scale to deliver that funding, you need procurement involved much earlier. But also procurement then should understand what they've worked very hard to put in place is actually delivering correctly. And I think that for me is what CHIC does so well for our members, is ensuring that the contracts through our frameworks or dynamic markets actually deliver good value.
So you obviously operate in a changing landscape. From both of you, how do you feel the impact of the 2023 Procurement Act? Has it changed the game and the parameters of what you're operating in? Have you seen big shifts, big differences?
I think is changing would be a more accurate description. The purity of public procurement hasn't changed fundamentally. The administrative expectations in terms of the publication of notices has added work for the future for new contracts. There's a new type of framework called an open framework that can be effectively refreshed over a period of time. We've looked at those and don't actually think they're going to add anything for us at the moment. We might come back to them. So there has been some change. Probably the biggest, Andy, is around lower value work. We do loads and loads and loads of procurement for our members, which is under the public procurement threshold. And we've used the same frameworks and hitherto dynamic purchasing system, which will be replaced with dynamic market. But under the new rules, we can't use that for below threshold work. So we're in the process, all my colleagues that I will leave them this legacy will be in the process of setting up something new, which we'll be calling CHIC approved lists or similar, to provide a route to market for lower value work for all of our members. So that has added an additional requirement and expectation on CHIC, which we certainly didn't see coming.
I think this, as John says, the Procurement Act has come in alongside other acts. We'll probably come on to it, but things like the Building Safety Act, etc., putting an awful lot more sort of requirements onto the sector in terms of how they navigate through the various different lots of legislation. For me, what the Procurement Act will do, and it is a slow turning ship at the moment, will probably bring a little bit more transparency to the performance side of it. So one of the key requirements is about actually publishing KPIs. So this is publicly publishing KPIs on above threshold value contracts, so 5 million plus, which in the past haven't existed as a requirement. And what hopefully that will do as we start building up this knowledge base is ensure that actually contractors are delivering, that contracts are delivering what they set out to deliver. And this isn't about sort of contractor bashing or member expectations maybe being too high in terms of what the contract market can deliver, but it's about fundamentally building into future procurements that right sizing of a contract. And for me, that will be a key change in terms of what the Procurement Act will bring to the table.
You mentioned that building safety, Luke. It obviously remains a primary concern to the social housing sector. How are your kind of frameworks designed to address these issues, and do you see trends in this area moving forward with even perhaps more greater legislation? We've seen AWAB's law and everything come in as well.
I think the legislation is still being understood at the moment, so there's a lot more. There's a lot that the sector doesn't fully understand in terms of the Building Safety Act and what the requirements are, particularly around people's and individual responsibility under the Act. What we've done as an organisation is new frameworks, and as we're refreshing frameworks into their next sort of iteration, is trying to fully understand what the difference between PAS and CAS is, and building in some of the building safety requirements up front. So actually we're assessing the supply chain right at the very beginning on their ability to navigate through things like the Building Safety Act, particularly for high-risk buildings, etc. And what that should give confidence to our members is that when they come to call off from our contracts, we've already undertaken all of that due diligence. We've already assessed that this supplier is a competent supplier to be able to deliver those kind of works. The issue that we've got is because it is so new in the sector at the moment, even the competent suppliers are struggling to demonstrate their competence at the moment. So we've got to keep working with the sector. We've got to keep working with members and contractors and consultants to actually understand how they go about applying the new regulations and how they go about demonstrating it effectively.
Great. John, The decarbonisation journey for the sector is obviously a big one. It is operating amongst, shall I generously say, some shifting political conditions at the moment, but the sector itself is also moving beyond just simple pilots now, and it's getting into large-scale programs. How can CHIC support the sector in that journey and make sure that the sector delivers both speed, quality, and at the scale it needs to?
By doing what we naturally do, giving access to the right consultants and surveyors so that our members can understand what they have to do to decarbonise their homes and overlay that on their planned investment programmes, so they've got a more sophisticated procurement expectation, and then make sure we have the right frameworks and the right contractors on those frameworks and suppliers supplying those contractors to be able to deliver the decarbonisation journey at scale. In my opinion, the sector is still effectively responding to grant opportunity rather than planning at the level that it needs to really understand how we're going to get to net zero in 2050, and the years are ticking by. So I still think there's quite a lot of work to do on the understanding what the options are and planning those options, so we've got the right procurement solutions in place to be able to deliver at scale. But we're getting there. We are making progress. So fingers crossed we will get all the way.
Thanks.
Can I just add to that as well?
Yeah.
And say one of the key sort of fundamentals around certainly delivering the decarb agenda is recognising that there isn't one size that fits all. That each property is different. How the residents live in a property is slightly different. So it was recognising that we needed a different model in terms of how we approach. So a planned maintenance model where it's, for example, scheduler rates and it's easily quantifiable doesn't necessarily work for decarbonisation. You needed something slightly different, something that could be right size, something where actually the member entering into a partnership with the contractor can work effectively to deliver the right outcomes, not just deliver a programme. And that's a very different mind shift in terms of how the sector has responded to works and kind of services. One of the core for me, not just with CHIC, but with procurement, is about getting them engaged very early on in the design of a programme. And as John says, the sector, unfortunately, at the moment is still reacting to grant funding, not strategically planning to decarbonise their properties. It's almost like the sector has latched onto the EPCC. Let's drive to try and get everything as EPCC because that'll tick a box. But actually, some of the works they're doing now wouldn't achieve EPCA in the future. And unfortunately, some of the works that we've even seen being delivered through some of the CHIC contracts will have to be undone in order for that property to achieve a higher EPC in the future. And for me, that's just fundamentally a waste of time. So the sector, again, isn't good at looking ahead for that.
Yeah, there's a need to get it right, but get it right first time, isn't there? So we're not recreating our steps all the time. So Luke, you mentioned a few times about the focus here at CHIC on residents. How does CHIC continue to support housing providers to ensure that residents remain at the forefront of all solutions?
I think for us it is a challenge. It's fundamental to what we do, but I think it comes back to the fact that we're asset managers that deliver procurement. We're not just procurement specialists. And what that really means to me is that the team within CHIC and the team that we've created have a knowledge and understanding, both operational, because they've been delivering these kind of works out on site. Because of that, what they do is that they have that knowledge and understanding as to what is actually important to the resident. So when a planned programme, a member comes to us with the planned programmes, kitchens and bathrooms, one of the first things we ask is what's your resident engagement plan around this? It's not just about the specification of the kitchen or the bathroom. It's actually about how do you want operationally this service to be delivered. And that is where the resident engagement comes in. That's where the resident voice needs to be heard as part of the process. I remember when I first came into the housing sector many, many years ago, far too many than I want to currently recall, if I'm honest with you. And we were tendering, and my background is from the contractor side of it, and we were tendering for some of these works. And at that point in time, a resident was always as part of the evaluation panel. So we were always having to sit in front of a resident as part of the evaluation for a tender. Now, very rarely does that happen. And we've lost that. So the sector has lost that sort of social conscious, that sort of resident voice as part of the procurement process. And one of our key sort of aims for the next 5 years is to try and feed that back into the procurement process and encourage more of that resident engagement up front.
Andy, can I add that if you go and talk to anybody in the CHIC team and the wider ARC team, ARC as managing agent for CHIC, and ask why do we do what we do, there's a golden thread that goes all the way to better resident outcomes. That's what we do. It's what drives us, and that's the culture that we want to prevail as new people join the team. They will attest to that it's about the resident journey. And just to emphasise that, you mentioned the conference earlier, the conference last week. We had residents at the conference, we had residents at the awards dinner. One of the sessions was talking about the resident voice, and we had residents actually participating in that and talking about that. So for us, it's absolutely fundamental to what we do, and the KPIs that Luke talked about is about understanding if we're achieving it and having that feedback loop into why we do our events and conferences, which is about collaboration, meeting, sharing and learning.
And of course it's vital because no one understands the home better than the resident. They're the people that live within it. I just want to kind of bring the conversation to a kind of close. We've covered a lot of pieces already. John, I just wonder from your position of where you've sat in that CEO chair over the last 16 years, can you just share what your perspective is of the current state of the procurement market, but also give us a little view to how you're seeing procurement evolve to address some of these challenges that we've discussed today?
So the current state of the market is relatively stable. There are a limited number of consortia who tend to be sector specific. So in the housing sector, as you've already said, we're one of the larger and more recognised working nationally. And just the scale of what we do and other consortia do proves that there is a really, really important place for collaboration around asset management and procurement. So I think there's a stability, and we will see that continuing to deliver more value in all sorts of ways. In terms of my look forward, one of the things we set CHIC up to do was to separate materials from labour, and we've done some of it really successfully, but not at the scale that we should have done. So again, the legacy I'm leaving for Luke and the rest of the team is an objective to try and do that at a bigger scale, because if we can work directly as we do with materials manufacturers and merchants, supplying into contractors who provide the labour and actually manage service delivery, then we can improve quality for residents, but we can also do that more efficiently. So as I sit smoking my pipe, drinking my pints at lunchtime, looking back at what's being achieved, my expectation is that we will see more materials separated from labour, which ultimately achieves better outcomes and more money being circulated in the sector for the benefit of residents.
Great. And Luke, just finishing with a bit of a forward look. So in your view, what steps should CHIC be taking to ensure that it sustains its kind of growth trajectory at the moment and develop further as an organisation to meet the needs of the sector over the coming decade or so?
I think, as John mentioned earlier, the sector is still quite reactive around procurement, which means we have to be reactive to what the sector needs. It's about making sure then that we are sort of horizon scanning, looking at what is coming down the line, how we're structuring our frameworks, how we're structuring our routes to market to actually not just meet the requirements today, but also the requirements in 2, 3, 4 years' time. And the only way we're going to do that is actually by engaging and listening to the sector. And that's both sort of members, our clients, in terms of what their long-term aspirations are, but also the supply chain. How can the supply chain meet the demand to deliver what the sector is requiring, and make sure that we're structuring both the technical and the commercial aspects of our frameworks to actually be able to right size and deliver against that. And the sector is very good at changing its mind very, very quickly. So having that flexibility built into our frameworks enables us to react quite quickly to what the sector requires.
Yeah, there's always going to be a need for flexibility.
Always going to be a need for flexibility.
Great. Well, John, Luke, thank you very much for your time. It's been a very interesting and a wide-ranging conversation. We've covered a number of topics there. John, if I could just say thank you and congratulations, not just on your time here with CHIC, but in your career and everything you've given to the sector over these years. And Luke, I wish you nothing but every success as you step into the CEO chair of CHIC moving forward.
Before you have your final closing word, I think it's really important for me to say a few thank yous. The core of CHIC's governance has been a board made up primarily of members, and there's been quite a few have come and gone, plus two very, very inspiring and capable independent chairs, Maggie Punya and now Amanda, and the strength they've brought to a growing consortium, understanding the sector and delivering services for the sector has been hugely important. So my thanks to them for their time and their stewardship. And then thanks to Luke, but to the much wider CHIC team and colleagues in ARC. Coming to work's been fun. It's been blooming hard work, but I've really enjoyed every moment of it, and I'm really proud of what we've achieved, both in terms of service delivery in CHIC and in social value outcomes, directly and indirectly through CHIP. So just from me, it's thank you to all my colleagues for making it such an enjoyable outcome, and good luck for the future.
Thanks, John. I think that's a great way to finish. Thank you, everybody.